So,
what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to Weekly Top 5's from Library Chess Productions. This time around, we're indulging the sports fan on the channel, and we're going to be talking about our top 5 National Hockey League players of all time. I'm so excited. This is our first foray really into the sports world. And I mean, like, look, hockey, I mean, obviously, I love hockey, and I've loved hockey since I was a kid. When we were in high school together, we were both, like, deep cuts, like, really into hockey. You've lessened on it lately, but you still, I mean, it's still like, oh, I don't like hockey anymore. Like,
I still
really
love the sport, I just don't watch it because I'm doing other things, and I can't dedicate the time to really follow it.
It's true. It's not exactly like, oh, you know, I'll dabble in hockey here and there. Yeah. It's like, nah, hockey, you're kind of all in.
I don't dabble in things. Like, when I get into something, I want to get knee-deep in it, and I just can't afford to do that. But, like, if somebody's like, let's go watch an NHL game, and I can do it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
let's do this.
I love hockey.
Exactly.
And one note before we continue is my players are going to come from a specific time when I actually did watch hockey. Just so you know, if people are wondering why is it all players from this time, it's like because that's when I watched it religiously, so that's what I know.
So he's looking at like probably mid to late '90s, early 2000s, like sort of that era. Mine's kind of a little more, you know, a little further down, up and down the timeline.
Okay, so my number 5 is my favorite defenseman of all time, Al McGinnis.
Nova Scotian connection. He's Nova Scotian like we are.
The guy who would murder you with slap shots.
Oh my God.
And just a good player all around, but definitely known for his slap shots and whatnot. And one thing, like I know Chris Pronger kind of went on and did some other stuff with Niedermeyer?
Yeah.
And kind of got maybe even more known for that, but I've always loved Al and Pronger together.
Because Pronger was this like gorilla on skates. Like he's so tall. And at the time he was like young, and there's like, man, this guy's gonna be like one of the greatest of all time.
But they're like one of my favorite defensive pairings of all time. And Al McGinnis is my favorite defenseman of all time, so that's what I have to say. One
thing that I always loved about Al McGinnis is he was one of, like, towards the latter part of his career, a lot of players were starting to switch to like the composite sticks that were made at least a little bit out of fiberglass, and he always stuck with the wooden stick. And the fact that he had easily the hardest shot in the league while still using the older wooden sticks was still like, man, you can bring up all this technology you want, but at the end of the day, you got to buckle up the chin strap and fire that shot. And that's what I always loved about Al McGinnis. He was like, before Sidney Crosby came around, he was really like Nova Scotia's claim to fame. My number 5 favorite NHL player of all time is Martin St. Louis. Made most of his noise with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I believe the only Stanley Cup that Tampa Bay has ever won. They won while Martin St. Louis was on the team. And what I loved about St. Louis was he's tiny. He was like one of those Paul Kariya types that it's like, man, this guy's too small to play in this league. He's going to get murdered. Martin St. Louis didn't necessarily have the speed of like a Paul Kariya, because Paul Kariya could just skate away from those guys. Like there's no way they're going to catch him, except for that one time that Scott Stevens so totally caught him. But like, so like Kariya had the speed. What Martin St. Louis had was he had the leadership and the top end skill. Despite the fact that he was like at times the smallest player in the NHL, he was so good and he would put up points, and he was such a good playmaker and was really good with the puck. Had the leadership skills to help lead a team to the Stanley Cup, like a young team that probably shouldn't have been there, but he helped lead them to a Stanley Cup. And that's why he's always kind of endured as one of my favorite players of all time. Proven that even though I'm a big guy, the little guy can get it done sometimes too. So Martin St. Louis is my number 5.
Good pick, but I can't add anything.
Right.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, Martin St. Louis. One last point about Martin St. Louis, the ultimate underdog. He was a player that was undrafted.
Oh, dang.
He was never drafted into the league, joined the league as a free agent, went on to become a guy that probably, if he's not already in the Hockey Hall of Fame, he will be at some point. So to go from undrafted to a probable Hockey Hall of Famer, Marty St. Louis.
All right, my number 4 is Paul Kariya.
Oh, really?
Who we just talked about a lot.
Exactly.
I think this would probably be one of the bigger surprises for, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not a name that I would have anticipated would have been on your list.
I've always loved Paul Kariya because, like, I mean, he was skillful, obviously. Very Gretzky-like. I love players, like, I'm a goalie guy first and foremost, but if I wasn't in net, I would be Paul Kariya if I was talented, because he would rather assist a play.
Yes.
Shoot. He said, like, if Solani would have came onto the team sooner, I wouldn't have taken as many shots.
Right, exactly.
Right? And I love that. I love the selflessness of a player like that who would rather just set up a goal, right? And I mean, he could shoot and all that, but he would just rather assist. And as I said with Al McGinnis, I like about his pairing with Pronger. I love the Solani-Kariya pairing too. Again, one of my favorite pairings, and Paul Kariya was always my favorite of the two. So yeah, my number 4 is Paul Kariya. And
let me paint the picture of that. Like I mentioned it when I was kind of talking about San Luis, and I kind of mentioned Kariya with that whole getting caught that one time by Scott Stevens. It was in a playoff series. If you're not familiar with this, it was in a playoff series. Go to YouTube and look up Paul Kariya, Scott Stevens. And Kariya's like coming across the middle, which as a smaller player you never do because that's where the big guys are. But he was coming across the middle, watching the puck, and Scott Stevens just lights him up. And he's laying there, and you can see, like, as he's on the ice, he has a glass visor, or one of the plastic visors, and you can tell he's, like, laying there, and it doesn't even look like he's breathing. And you can tell when he finally starts to breathe because his visor fogs up. It's just incredible visual, right? And you finally see his visor or whatever, and they eventually get him back off the ice. Lunatic comes back into the game. Again, something that would never happen today. Because apparently back in this time, concussions weren't a thing.
They didn't exist.
They just did not exist. And according to Gary Bettman, they don't exist today. But so he comes back into the game, but not only does he come back into the game, he gets the puck and he screams down this wing and he winds up and he just blasts it glove side on Martin Brodeur, one of the greatest goaltenders of all time. And the call is just great. Off the floor, on the board, Paul Kariya. And what a great call. That whole thing is just, again, YouTube, Paul Kariya, Scott Stevens. You will not be disappointed. So, my number 4 is from my favorite position, which like him is goaltending, from my favorite team, and it's their current goaltender, and it's Carey Price. Typically, I would have thought that Price would be higher on the list, but like, I love Carey Price. When Carey Price is Carey Price, he's the best goaltender in the world. There's no the only possible debate about that from certainly the last little while is Henrik Lundqvist. That's the only debate. So when he's himself, he's the best in the world. Part of his issues over the last few years is he really hasn't been himself. He's had knee injuries, he's had other issues that has just kept him from being himself. The last couple of years have not been great for Carey Price. Had Carey Price been Carey Price for basically the entirety of his last few years, he'd be higher on this list. Like he's gotten Montreal to some Eastern Conference Finals, and he's been head and shoulders their best player for years now. So I love Carey Price. I have a $300 framed photograph of Carey Price in heaven. No, it's upstairs. So I'm a huge Carey Price fan. He's number 4 on this list, with the caveat that he would be higher had he sort of been himself over these last couple of seasons.
Yeah. Like, I don't watch, but I always hear about Carey Price, how good he is, and how he saved the day and stuff.
Yeah, pretty
and it's
much.
like, I got respect for that. Any goalie that is that good, I'm sure I would like him if I watched hockey. My number 3 is Eric Lindros. My favorite non-goalie of all time, and I seem to have a thing for concussed players, I guess.
Ooh, apparently so. Yeah.
It sucks. It's depressing because they get knocked out.
It's true.
But Eric Lindros could do everything, and it's really, I think, I mean, you know more about hockey than I do, but I think it's really one of the shames in NHL history is that he didn't have a better career because he could have had a better career. And he should have had a better career because he was big, he could hit, he could score, he could pass, he could do everything, and then he would get a concussion.
Exactly.
And I spent a lot of time being like, well, when's he gonna be back?
Yeah.
I want my favorite, like one of my favorite players to come back, but yeah, but I'm always gonna love Eric Lindros, so that's my number 3.
The fact that we didn't get more of Eric Lindros' career is one of the great shames in hockey, and it's obviously it's not Lindros' fault, because like when you think of the power forward in hockey, that's the name that you come up with, because he was a center, first of all. He was huge, and he would just go in front of the net, and things would happen. Good things would happen. And like you say, he could do everything. He could hit, he could score, he could make plays. He was always around the puck. He's kind of like Rob Gronkowski in the NFL right now. Like, he's a tight end that, like, there's almost no way to defend him, because he's too fast for the big, huge players, and he's too strong for the smaller ones. And that was kind of Lindros. That was the position that he was in. He was too big for the smaller forwards to handle, and he was too fast for the big, lumbering, ridiculous defensemen to handle. And that's kind of where Eric Lindros was. And for a couple of years, this is a guy that you could have looked at like, this guy's going to break so many records, because who in the world is going to be able to stop him? My number 3 favorite NHL player of all time is Mark Messier. Mess, as we call him. And the reason that he is on this list in this spot, which is kind of interesting that he's ahead of Carey Price. But the reason that he's ahead of Carey Price, well, first of all, Price is still playing. So Price is still building his legacy. Mark Messier obviously is not. Mark Messier is the guy in hockey that when you think of the term leader, Mark Messier is like the captain of all hockey players. And he was a guy that in the early 90s, a talented player, no question about it, a talented player, but just a leader of men. Like, he was just the dude that anytime anything was going sideways, you looked at Messier, and it's like, okay, Messier's doing this, I gotta do this too. And I'll always remember in that 94 Stanley Cup playoffs, when New York was down in the conference final, I believe it was, and he came out and he said, I guarantee we're going to win Game 6. And it was on the front page of the New York Times. Like, the guarantee, and they won Game 6, and they won Game 7, and they won the Cup that year. Just because he's the leader of men. If he says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And that's why I've always loved Mark Messier for that particular trait that he has, and it's good enough for me to be my number 3 of all time.
I was never a fan, but I can totally see what you're saying. Never hated him either, though. He was always kind of there for me.
Yeah, just a guy that got the experience of not only playing in the late 80s with Gretzky and Curry on those unbelievable Edmonton Oilers teams that were just untouchable, but then also got that experience and then brought that to the Rangers in New York and took that Rangers team that was good but not great, and yet they won the Cup.
All right, so my number 2 is Curtis Joseph. He was a Toronto goalie when I was big into hockey, and he was saving the day so much that built a love for him, because he was putting in that work, and he was really the main reason why the team, now I know they never won a cup, but one of the main reasons that the team even made it to the playoffs was Curtis Joseph.
Right.
So I love him for that reason. And I certainly like him as just a goalie in general. But had he been a goalie on another team, before, or whatever maybe he was before, but you know what I mean. If he had never been on Toronto, I don't think he would have made my list. I enjoyed him. He was an entertaining player. He was a good player. But there are goalies I like more. As just a goalie, I like Martin Brodeur more. I like Luongo more. Dustin Tokarski I like more. There's goalies I like more. But because he was the Toronto guy back when I watched, then that's why I will always have an undying love for Curtis Joseph.
Here's the pedestal. Here's where Cujo sits. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why.
No,
I like him in maybe a top 15, top 20, because I don't know that many hockey players really.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things, maybe he makes that, but he's 2 because of what he did for Toronto.
No, exactly, and that makes perfect sense. And yeah, there was a time when Cujo was damn near unbeatable.
Yeah.
You're just well, all right, so we're playing Cujo, so we're going to score once tonight. And so you go to your own goaltender and be like, if you don't get a shutout, we're going to lose this game.
Yeah, he was one of those goalies that they wouldn't have to worry so much about playing defense. They could just go be offensive, because he's like, you got it, don't worry about it.
Yeah, defensemen are going to pinch. It's fine, because even if you give up a 2-on-1 the other way, it's Cujo's got it.
Cujo's got it, don't worry about it.
And 99 times out of 100 he did have it. So it's there was a period in time when that guy was pretty well unbeatable. Somehow I get the feeling that the goalie train is beginning, and I think that train's going to keep going until it pulls into the station. My number 2 favorite NHL player of all time is Martin Brodeur. And again, another player where, for a period of time, was virtually unbeatable. And it's funny that you mentioned Cujo right before this. If there was any goaltender in the league at that time that could outplay Cujo, it was Brodeur, and they did that in that one playoff series.
Yeah.
That it was like the Eastern, I think it was the East Final, one of the years that New Jersey won the Cup. And
New Jersey kept beating Toronto in the playoffs.
Yeah,
and
they
it
just
annoyed me. But the problem is, like, I love Brodeur. I actually, like, as just goalies, no team allegiance, I like Brodeur more than Cujo.
Yeah, exactly.
But I hated Brodeur.
Because it was like, why can't you just score? And it's like, well, it's not that easy because it's Marty Brodeur. That's a player that I always wished could have played in Montreal, because he's from Montreal, right? So it's like, man, if Brodeur could get like one season in Montreal and try to win a cup. His style, you watch his style now, and he's like one of the first of like the hybrid goaltenders, like kind of along with, you know, some of the other guys that came out around this time, where they're kind of hybriding into the butterfly style, but he still had a lot of like stand-up tendencies. Like you watch him try to make like a kick save or something, and it's like he's almost standing up straight while he's trying to do it. It's still like watching him play is like, man, how is this effective? It was super effective.
Super effective.
So how's he going to stop this one? Okay, well, it's the glove. Well, his glove's pretty incredible. Well, there's a different kind of glove save, and he was so versatile, and again, so almost unbeatable at the time. So Brodeur's my number 2.
My number 1 is Mike Richter. Nah, it's Dominic Hasek.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's gonna have to be Dominic Hasek. He's my favorite goalie ever, favorite player ever, maybe my favorite athlete ever. Just everything. He was so exciting. They used to say you got to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good. And I think, and they said, I can't remember who it was, said that about Hasek years ago. Like, he kind of created luck. But, like, he was smart. Like, I remember seeing something years ago how, like, he'd be down on his back, as he often was. And you think he's just, you know, flopping. And there's certainly some flopping going on. But he would, like, look up and, like, see the reflections and stuff and see where the puck was. Like, he was smart. He wasn't just some guy who was randomly just throwing shit out there to see if he could make a save. Fundamentally, maybe wasn't the most solid in that regard, but didn't need it, obviously, because he's got records. He's seen as one of the greatest goalies of all time. Like, can't argue with that level of success.
Dominic Hasek was like the Undertaker of goaltending. And follow me on this, because I do have a point. He was in your head before you ever took a shot. And the more that he looked down and out, the more it approached a certainty that you were not going to score. It doesn't matter how it happened. You were not going to score. I don't care where you put the puck. Something of Hasek's was going to get in the way. Whether it was his head, or it was his elbow, or something. Maybe he just whips his pants down and stops it with his butt. I don't know, anything. Like, he was going to stop the puck no matter where it was going. And because there were just so many times that, like, well, geez, look, they're finally going to score. Where did his leg come from?
Yeah, I mean, a testament to my love for Hasek was, remember when I texted you and I was like talking, and I was like, does he have a son that plays hockey?
Right.
Like, that would have got me more into hockey. Him just having a son that plays hockey would have got me into it.
DJ Hasek.
Yeah, DJ Hasek. Yeah, I love, I mean, he influenced me. I mean, I don't play sports anymore, but when I did play, like, road hockey with you and our other friends, when we had other friends.
Yeah.
I played like him. Obviously not as good, but I certainly played like him. I'm willing to commit early and just make a weird save, and that's so when you get a player that kind of speaks to your own style and whatnot, then yeah.
That was very poetic.
And my goalie name was the Denominator.
Yes, yeah. His Hasek's nickname was the Dominator because he was. Yeah. And Tyler's nickname was the Denominator because he's less than the Dominator, but
there's no reason, just it sounded like Dominator.
High school math jokes. And I'm going to close this off with my number one NHL player of all time. Going to be no shock to this guy. It's Patrick Waugh. We go back to Montreal Canadiens goaltender. Patty Roy. That was his official name when he went to Colorado. It was Pat Roy. You can't call him Waugh anymore. He's in America. It's Pat Roy instead of Patrick Waugh. One of the more interesting personalities, I think, in hockey during a time when you weren't really encouraged to show personality in hockey. Like the stories of Patrick Waugh that he would just eat a large plate of fries before every game. Because he was like, well, I'm going to carbo load. He would literally just sit there and eat a giant plate of fries and then go out and play hockey at the world's highest level.
Yeah,
like, how does that work?
Great goalies.
Exactly. Like, I mean, I have a glass of pop and I'm like, can't do it. Last goaltender, of course, to win a Stanley Cup for Montreal. Where you kind of talked about Hasek, where you're like, probably not the most technically, fundamentally sound goaltender. Like, Patrick Waugh was like the fundamental butterfly style goaltender, like along with Martin Brodeur in this period of time. And obviously Waugh just gets the bump because he played for Montreal, and it's the last time they won the cup was with him in net. And I'll always regret the way that he left Montreal. I think he made the right decision, but the way he left Montreal was always like, oh, God, I hate this story. No, Patrick Waugh, like I said, I always loved watching him play. Right up until the end of his career, I thought he was I think he was magnificent doing what he did, and he was arguably one of the best, if not the best to ever do it. So Patrick Waugh's my number one.
He was a good goalie.
He was a
and like you said,
goalie.
he was more fundamentally sound, so you wouldn't necessarily be watching him being like, what are you doing? Like, with Hasek, it was like, even though he'd probably save it, it's like, what are you doing? Like, I'd hate to be a player with Hasek because you'd be having a heart attack. Like, what?
Oh my God,
It's like,
never mind, it's fine.
You're like, don't worry, I got it, I'm sound. I'm not saying he's not capable of flashy saves, because, any goalie was.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, it was probably a little easier to be a teammate of Pat Roy.
Of Pat Roy's, exactly. It's like, all right, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for another weekly Top 5. Like, comment, subscribe, follow us down here, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.